Life Audio.
Coming up on Encouragement for You, Christian psychologist Dr. Dan Allender addresses the subject of overcoming sexual abuse, and Dan Cathy talks about the emotions of men.
Welcome to the Encouragement for You podcast, brought to you by Encouragement Communications in association with the Salem Web Network and is part of the Life Audio Faith Toolkit series. For more inspirational, faith-affirming podcasts, visit lifeaudio.com. In just a moment, your host, Don Hawkins, will introduce today's episode. First, a word from our sponsors. The statistics on both men and women who have had to deal with the trauma of childhood sexual abuse are alarming, and the results are often emotionally devastating. Dr. Dan Allender addresses the subject in his book, The Wounded Heart, and he joins host Don Hawkins to talk about overcoming the effects of sexual abuse.
Dan, how long ago did you write The Wounded Heart?
Oh, Don, I would say a lot of the writing began in around 1986, 1987, but it was published in 1988.
Okay, and I knew it had been literally just out for a couple of years when we first started doing Life Perspectives, and you were on the program, and we talked about this so many times. Is the subject of childhood sexual abuse and overcoming it in adulthood as important today as it was then?
Oh, research actually indicates that we see a rise in sexual abuse year by year at a rate of about 6%. Where we were 20-some years ago when I wrote that book, we are looking at a generation in which the damage of abuse has become far more extensive. We look at a culture today that, frankly, is able to sort of see child abuse, prostitution. I mean, again, the average prostitute that you might sneer at from your car window, wondering how someone could do something so awful. The average prostitute begins at age 14, usually in flight from a family where there has been sexual abuse prior to her being exploited on the streets.
And Dan,
we're living in a culture that is beyond harm.
I know that you and Rebecca, your wife, are involved in ministering to prostitutes and trying to help them out of the life and into real life on the streets of Seattle. And you've suggested there is a definite link between childhood sexual abuse and prostitution.
Oh, it is phenomenal. We're looking truly at the reality that the exploitation of women, literally the sale of women, will be the number 2 largest point of business in the world. Currently, it is drugs that are number 1, armaments that are number 2, and women, number 3. Human trafficking will have come to such an extent that it will be, we're looking, Don, truly at a scourge of sexual harm in our world that opens our eyes, I hope, to the reality that many of us equally have a history of our own harm that often we're as unwilling to address as we are the nature of the harm in the world around us.
Dan, let's bring this down to the level of the individual today, many of whom, listening to this program, have not gotten into prostitution, have not become victims of human trafficking, but somewhere in their lives, either in their conscious minds or perhaps buried in their subconscious, something horrific has happened to them in childhood. Talk about the effects that has and just how common it is.
Well, common enough to say that almost in the realm of 1 out of every 3 women have been sexually abused at a level that indeed crosses the line into a actual crime. But if you open it up to events like an uncle who walks in as you're showering, that obviously wouldn't constitute a literal crime, and yet has the same damage as abuse itself, you're looking somewhere in the range of 50 to 60% of women have been violated in that way, and probably 1 out of every 3 to 1 out of every 4 men have a history of abuse. But include in that how you were introduced to pornography as a younger boy or a young man. Many of those situations that men would not count to be sexual abuse actually are sexually abusive. But the damage, always we begin with this one word, Don, shame. Shame silences us. It takes away our face. It keeps us from having a voice. It brings us to a hatred of desire. Ultimately, we come to hate God's creation of our bodies and of our desire and of relationships. That's a huge wart that evil brings to each of our lives when there has been that damage. God adores our sexuality, and evil, it's not that evil loves sex. Evil hates our sexuality, which is why it's so important that we do the good, hard work of asking the question, what is evil up to? What are, as Ephesians 6:10 tells us, we need to know the schemes of the devil. Yeah. What are the schemes of evil with regard to your sexuality? How has it worked to accuse you? How has it worked to splinter and divide you? How has it really worked to deaden your own heart toward the pleasure and joy that your body was meant to bring? Those are crucial categories for us to think through biblically.
Dan, you've talked about shame, and certainly for a person who's aware of childhood sexual abuse, there has to be a great deal of shame. Can there still be shame present if a person isn't aware that they've been abused?
Oh, my gosh, yes. Many times I work with people who, it's like they have 2 + 2, but they've never hit the computer to be able to have it surface with the figure 4. Yet you look at many of the ways in which they have lived their lives basically hiding their face, being so self-critical, with a deep sense of emptiness and at one level despair, and yet they can live, in many ways, very good, moral, honorable lives, and yet, here's the key word, without joy. I mean, one of the guarantees is that shame will sap your heart's capacity for joy. And when there isn't much joy or passion with life. It doesn't say that you have a history of abuse, but it does say there's something that is desperately important for you to begin to name and face in your own life story.
Is there hope for overcoming the toxic effects of shame and restoring the joy?
Well, Don, you know only too well. We believe the gospel changes the human heart. But the next sentence is, but not easily and not quickly.
Yeah.
Not with a magic wand that you say the gospel 3 times around your head and click your heels and you're back home. No, the gospel calls you to honesty. And that's a lifetime process. Honesty about the nature of the abuse, about the honesty of the damage that you're having to deal with. You don't change what you can't name. So owning up to, I've been abused, my father abused me, my brother abused me, and not making excuses for them, not defending them, not minimizing it, is a huge beginning point for that process of change. But second is recognizing the wounds, meaning you don't know where to put the salve until you know what the wounds are in your own life. And though we've been speaking very generally, you have to name the particularity of your own life. Where are the wounds in your life? Where have you been drawn by shame to hide your face? Where have you learned to hate yourself? Where have you been seduced by the accuser's voice and its cruel finger-pointing accusations? Where have you succumbed to that and actually called the lies of evil true? That's a hard labor and one that does not come quickly. But when you have that honesty and you're willing to enter the wounds, we do know this: those who mourn will be comforted.
Those are tremendously encouraging words. I'm thinking about 2 people that I know and have ministered to. They were sisters. Both were victims of abuse. One of them just literally shut down and had virtually no relationship of intimacy with her husband, had no joy in her life. And then another one literally got into a lot of sexual acting out and casual relationships with many people. Are those sort of the 2 common responses for women who've been abused?
Well, it's a brilliant way of putting it. And let's think of it in slightly different terms. One sounds like the older brother, and one sounds like the prodigal. And in many ways, you've got those 2 worlds. You've got self-righteousness and angry, dutiful obedience to God that is joyless. On the other hand, you've got promiscuity. You've got this licentiousness, certainly a indulgence in passion, but ends up drowning you in the gluttony of your own desire. Well, both worlds are neither world is good. And here's the scary part of the gospel. Jesus invites us through that story to actually see that it is the prodigal who comes home.
Yeah.
And we don't know about where the older brother ends up after the father confronts him in the back field. So often we actually think that the older brother's dutifulness is still preferential to the promiscuity of the younger brother. Again, I'm not commending either of them.
No.
I'm simply saying that in many ways the radical nature of that story is to see that the person who comes home often is at least the one that had passion.
Dan, as we talk about doing that hard labor, that hard work, that process of, we might even call it working out your own salvation, knowing that God has done the work of salvation, often wise, biblical, godly counsel can be of help, can it not?
Just as the harm came from a relationship, redemption is meant to occur in relationship. This is not between you and God in your prayer closet. It includes that, but it also includes the face of another encourager, another wise prophet, priest, and king who's able to maturely help you see the goodness of redemption, the strength of the truth, and in many ways the freedom of what the life of following the King of Kings brings. So it's really important to hear what you just said, that if you know there's damage and you simply take 2 aspirin and go to bed, it's not enough to deal with the damage of this tremendous evil.
We'll be back with more after a brief word from our sponsors. And don't forget to listen for Don's live weekend talk show, Encouragement Live, heard Saturdays at 7:05 p.m. Central Time on American Family Radio and other radio stations around the country, as well as on the worshipchannel.org. On our next segment, former Chick-fil-A CEO Dan Cathy discusses a subject with host Don Hawkins that many men don't want to talk about: their emotions.
Introduce Tom to us, if you will.
Well,
Dan.
thank you. This has been a unique relationship and a special relationship, and a new relationship for me. Tom had been in our community for some time, and is the pastor of one of our Chick-fil-A operators, Doug Mickey, there in South Atlanta. But we had a friend of ours that in common that wanted to put together a group to talk about issues we've all dealt with in life, whether it be some type of crisis that we've experienced in our childhood, that issues that we've had to deal with, basically hurting hearts, grieving hearts, bruised hearts. And all of us at some point in time are going to have to deal with some real crisis in our life. And so this is a group of about 7 men. All of us are well north of 40 years old, so we've got a little life experience under our belt here thus far. And while the men are meeting upstairs in my home, in my little office there, we've got the ladies that are meeting with my wife in the dining room of our house. So we come in and get us a little snack real quick and have split up. But what a special time. And, Tom, I think we've had, about 10 or 12 sessions?
Yeah, about 12,
like that. Yes. And as I said, it's a group. Just a couple of folks knew each other. The rest of us, it's been going through and learning to be open and transparent. We all signed disclosure statements, confidentiality statements, I should say, where we covenanted among ourselves that things we talked about would stay right there in that room so that we could really begin to open up and minister to one another, and what a special time it's been.
Boy, and that's such a critical thing these days. And I have to mention, Tom, you and I share some common friendships with some other PCA pastors. The founding pastor of the PCA, Dr. Frank Barker, dear friend of many years here in Birmingham, and his successor at Briarwood Presbyterian Church, Harry Reeder. Both of those men, great servants of God, and I know you're very familiar with both of them.
Yes, and, both those men, and along with Dan and all these men, have a serious desire to minister to the whole person. And, a lot of times in the church, we don't get that time. We don't get the time to really be transparent as men with one another. And I know this, a group, men being with other men, and being willing to lower their guard, they often can't do that in the workplace. But having a safe place where you can lower your guard and share some of the hard times in life and know that someone has your back spiritually, is going to encourage you, lift you up, rejoice with you, and weep with you. And that's been a great time. And everyone has that. And just being here, I've had a chance to meet with some of these folks. I've talked to 3 or 4 of them, and everyone, as the Bible says, a proverb, even in laughter, the heart may ache. And everyone has an ache. And these folks who are waiting to spending the night here, they have aches. And I just chatted with a man a few minutes ago who shared about his death of his granddaughter, and a grief. And we just need to come along. We got to pray with each other. And everyone has that. And to me, just to see not just the men, but Dan and Chick-fil-A ministering not just to the physical needs of people, but the spiritual needs as well, is a real encouragement to me.
Yeah, and Tom, as we think about Scripture, talks in 1 Thessalonians about your whole being, spirit and soul and body being preserved blameless till the coming of Christ in 1 Thessalonians 5. And I appreciate the fact that, Dan, you would want to address this topic. As I mentioned to you, I was talking with my daughter earlier about our grandson, whom we lost, and we're very close to the anniversary of his death. And it's always tough when you lose someone in an untimely way, but it's tough when you lose someone in a timely way as well, Tom. Help us understand exactly what this animal grief that we're talking about really is.
Well, I guess what we've been learning in our group as we meet together is what we have experienced is that we tend to not want to even talk about it and don't even know about it. As men, as Dan said, are north of 40. We've hidden it, and we really don't know what it is. But to get it with other people and to go back and look at some of our childhood griefs or hard times that we've been through as adults, and to be willing to talk about those and to even bring them up and say, hey, this is the grief. This is where I should have been grieving. This is where I'm grieving now, and help us to understand it, and help us to say it's okay as men to go through these times and to learn how to be healed, how the Lord can bring healing to those griefs that we've gone through either in our childhood or in our adulthood.
Tom, you're touching on something that for all of us as men is a little bit of a nerve. Dan, has it been sort of a strange experience in some ways? Has it been a liberating experience?
Well, I think it's been strange in the sense that guys don't get as dead level honest and transparent as this group has become over these 12 sessions. And whether we're in an official small group as we are, that we've kind of banded together, but even more formally, I think one word of encouragement to listeners is that we've got to be willing to have guarded, careful relationships where we can nurture stronger, more intimate relationships. And we're not saying open up to everybody. That's irresponsible.
It's interesting, Dan, we men tend to think of tears as a sign of weakness, and yet we sort of laugh off that verse in John 11 where it says Jesus wept. To me, that's one of the most profound statements in Scripture.
Yeah, I share with my small group, I'm sharing this on national radio, that Sunday morning my wife was, she was going to be in Orlando for some extended period of time, and I shared with these guys, I literally just wept. Sitting in a McDonald's restaurant, thinking about going home to an empty house and missing my wife, and I just had the bad case of the boo-hoos right there in a McDonald's dining room, eating my McGriddle bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich that Sunday morning. But I think there's a place. One of the things that shocked me was how long it had been since I had really cried. I mean, really wept. I mean, I've had my eyes get moist and my voice chokes up from time to time, but that kind of surprised me, and I think I need to let myself cry more often.
I would agree with that, and my wife encouraged me the same thing. I was going to be talking with a guy that I'm really close to who's going through a really tough time, lost his job, going through some other really painful things in his life. And my wife reminded me, said, honey, it'd be okay for you to weep with him if he weeps and you feel inclined to weep. And, sometimes, Dan, we just sort of rule that out, but we need to rule that in.
Well, it's certainly important for our emotional state. Later that day, I felt just exhausted, and I went, why do I feel so? And I realized the incredible emotional draw that is on us physically, even as we go through an experience like that. But there is a cleansing, and it relieves, I think, maybe a lot of subliminal tension that may be there, and it's God's design that He built us that way, that we're built in the image of God, and certainly it says that in the Scripture about God weeping for His children, Jesus weeping for Lazarus, and all the other examples that are there. So if we're going to be Christians, we're going to follow Christ, and we need to follow Him in all areas of His emotional temperament, including how we deal with grief.
I think Jeremiah did that. He went through all this grieving time, and he says, but this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope, and great is your faithfulness. Yeah,
Lamentations 3, such a incredible high point in just the way he poured out his heart in grief, and tears running down his face like rivers, and talking about the loss of his city and his country and his people, and even their spiritual condition. And then that whole thing of your mercies are new every morning, great is your faithfulness. And there's where he regained hope. But I think sometimes people get stuck in a stage of grief. Have you seen that, Tom, in your ministry?
Yeah, I do. I think because of the failure to recognize it, maybe that's the first stage, and the failure to admit it. And I think especially in men, to not even realize that we had it, or to say, we weren't allowed to talk about that in our family. And so we denied it, and we didn't even talk about it. And so we're not used to talking about it, and we don't know how to handle it. And again, that's why it's great for men to get together with other men and to even to scrape the dirt off and say, hey, this is a real animal, this is a real thing in my life.
Yeah.
And let's begin to deal with this honestly.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Encouragement for You with Don Hawkins, host of Encouragement Live Radio and author of over 25 books, including Never Give Up and Master Discipleship Today. You can find more about Don and his books at encouragementlive.org. Encouragement for You is a production of Encouragement Communications with the Salem Web Network and lifeaudio.com. Editing by Phil Giebers, production by Elizabeth Andrade. If you enjoyed what you heard today, we'd love for you to head over to your favorite podcast app and leave us a review. It really does help people find us.
Let me take just a second to thank the team at Life Audio for their partnership with us on Encouragement for You. If you go to lifeaudio.com, you'll find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, Bible study, parenting, and more.
Stay encouraged and join us next time for Encouragement for You.
Feeling stressed? Let's take better care of you. I'm Bonnie Gray, the host of Breathe, the Stress Less podcast. Subscribe at lifeaudio.com.